how did you get into writing? Because I mean, obviously your passion was music and I had no idea, but you know, again, in this first chapter, you mentioned that you were writing for TV shows, which I had no idea that you were doing. And did you
Mhm.
fall into this, or did you have a background from college, your college days, or you know, like early on? What
Well,
led
yeah,
into this?
yes and no. My brother was a writer. My brother actually got in the Guinness Book of Records in 1978 for being the highest paid first time writer of a book. And he wrote a book.
But yeah, let's. Is that signed
Uh, yeah, well, here it is.
to what's his name?
This was his first book. It was called The 400, and he had a terrible but moment in his
Oh,
life as well with this. He got paid $1 million for his first book, and
nice negotiation.
yeah, nice
How'd that go?
negotiation. And then that was from again from the Simon and Schuster, who I mentioned a little earlier, and then there was a huge buzz in Hollywood about it, the 400, because it's inspired by a true story. He found out something happened that couldn't happen, and so he wrote the story about the 400. And the 400 were the 400 richest people in the world. They had a private club in New York, and it was called the 400 Club. It was for these rich people, you know, the Vanderbilts and that kind of thing. That was what everyone esteemed to join the 400 Club. But Stephen was an actor at the time, and he was on the beach in Jamaica with no money. He walked away from the last movie he did, which was called Lady Carolyn Lamb with Richard Chamberlain and Sarah Miles. And he went to Jamaica, and a very famous director called Robert Bolt said, "Stephen, you should write, because then you can control your own destiny." So he's sitting on the beach in Jamaica thinking, I'm not controlling anything apart from my suntan. You know, he had no money, no nothing. And he read this story, and he said, it's the anniversary of when the Bank of England was robbed. He looked at it and goes, Bank of England was never robbed. There's an expression in America, as safe as the gold in Fort Knox.
Hmm.
In England, it's as safe as the gold in the Bank of England. It's never been robbed, never. So he looked into it, and he found out it had been robbed by two Englishmen and two Americans. And so he thought, holy crap, this would make a great book. So he wrote the book about the robbery. And they did it by check kiting, and they started with checks for $5, and they worked up to checks for £100,000. And, you know, because it took 2 days to cover the checks, suddenly all this money was flowing, and these four guys robbed it of over £1 million, like $3 million, huge back then, and disappeared. And this was right when the Civil War was starting. And so it was a massive amount of money. And because of it, they formed an agency to track them down. And the guy who formed the agency was Pinkerton. And it was the Pinkertons. And in Europe, they had to form an agency to track them down. So they formed one for international police, and they called it Interpol. And then the Pinkertons became the FBI. And it was all because of these guys, right?
Hmm.
So my brother then gets another $1 million from America for the screenplay rights, and they cast it, and it is going to be the biggest movie ever. The four people that they signed to do it are for the two Brits. They've never done a movie together, and they were the two hottest stars in Britain, Sean Connery and Roger Moore. The two Bonds are going to star as the Brits. And who are they going to get for the Americans? Well, these two guys had just done two movies back to back that were massive. And the first one was a Western that was huge for them. And then the second one was a crime drama, but with tongue in cheek. It was really fun.
I know who
And
you're
so
talking
you guessing who it is?
about. It's Redford and Newman, right?
Redford and Newman. They just done the Sting. And so and that was that. I know that was the cast that was signed.
Nice.
Robert Redford, Paul Newman, Roger Moore, and Sean Connery. I mean, you think of that in 79, can't get bigger. So there's a massive amount of money out there. It's going to be like $40-50 million movie, which is unheard of back then. And then a movie comes out called Heaven's Gate. Heaven's Gate, directed by Michael Cimino, opened on Friday, closed on Saturday, and Warner Brothers crashed. Every big movie was tabled, and they only went to do the small movies, the family dramas with Dustin Hoffman, that kind of thing. And so my brother's movie suddenly went from all these 4 to nothing. But he always said to me, you should write, because he wrote a series of books. He wrote 4 more books. And one of them was made into a mini series with Joan Collins and George Hamilton. And that one, you can look it up. It was on CBS.
That's quite a library you got over there.
Yeah. That one was called Monte Carlo.
Oh.
And that was a big hit.
It's a good cover.
Yeah, big hit for him. And then he wrote a movie that didn't get made into a movie, which he was very disappointed about, called All the Tea in China. And then the 4th one he wrote was called The Artisan, and that got made into a movie with the German actor who won the Academy Award for Out of Africa. Little guy. Anyway, so there was, I'd always wanted to write, and Stephen had always encouraged me to write. And so I started writing, but I didn't think I could write a book. I didn't know how to write a book, and I couldn't type, but I figured I could write better than the TV, because American television, a lot of it is really crappy. And even the great shows tend to have what they call filler episodes, because they're trying to do, they used to try to do 22 episodes a year. And of those 22 episodes, you've got like 8 good ones during the sweeps, and the rest are just like, filler, and we'll have him go through that door, and then you'll come back in through that door, and that'll be it. And so I thought I can write that. And so I took some screenplay courses and bought some programs like Final Draft and started writing. And then I saw a show called 7 Days, a time travel show where the hero can go back in time 7 days to correct the problem, but he's a bit screwed up, and his appearance always creates problems. And I thought to myself, I like the show. I love time travel, I love science fiction. But there's a problem. If he's going back 7 days to the same place, why isn't he running into himself? Because he's there. He was there. And so I figured it out. I sat down and I thought, hang on a second. He's changing the timeline. There's an interdimensional timeline. And I wrote this whole story about this, how he does meet himself and then causes all these waves to happen, and everything that he's already reversed comes back and happens again. And he has to rectify everything in like a 2-hour special. So I write this out, and then I called up Paramount and said, can I speak to Chris Crowe, please? And not Cameron Crowe, Christopher Crowe. Who created it. And finally I get through to him, and he said, okay, I'll tell you what. He said, we'll go for lunch. And if what you've written makes sense, he said, because it is a gray area, we don't address it. If what you've written makes sense, I'll buy you lunch. And if it doesn't make sense, you buy me lunch. And I said, okay, done deal. That sounds fair to me. And before we'd ordered, he'd bought the idea. He said, this is great. And so I came on board as a consulting writer for 7 days, and then ended up writing their season finale and everything like that. And the season finale was, unfortunately, a little bit of an echo. It was called The Cure, and it was about a devastating pandemic where the cure for it was worse than the pandemic. I know. It's like, oh my God. And when Trump starts saying that, I'm like, oh no, don't ever replay my show. So
I still love the way you say The Cure. I still get excited when you say The Cure.
The Cure. Well, I managed to call it The Cure, and the pharmaceutical company was called Depeche Pharmaceuticals.
Is that right?
So I had to get 2 of my favorite bands in on network.